Welcome back to Just Blazor Programming. Better late than never. Today we're going to be discussing whether or not Blazor is hard to learn compared to its peers or just hard to learn in general. Well, it depends on what you already know, and the answer is most certainly yes. Yes, I'm sorry to say, but programming is not easy. Programming is a difficult thing to learn. It doesn't really matter which one you choose, Blazor included. Blazor has object-oriented programming in it, through the form of C#, and you have to learn the Blazor conventions as well on top of it in order to make use of it. When it comes to React and Angular, you have to learn some form of JavaScript or TypeScript, depending on which one you want to use, and then you have to learn the conventions they have. There's web application conventions that are shared between them, but they're all implemented differently. There are also other things you can go into. Let's say you want to go into game development, you have to learn how to use a game engine, most likely, or a proprietary engine if you decide to go there. Programming ain't easy. There's a reason why, on average, if you go into a sector, a business sector at least, through web app development, the average salary is roughly around six figures, low six figures, more or less. Pretty decent, and that's actually above average. In the United States, I believe the average is about 50 to 60K, so you're making well above that. And I don't know about the rest of the world, but I believe that it's also a pretty decent salary, depending. However, that doesn't take from the fact that it's hard to learn. It really doesn't matter which one you choose, and Blazor is no exception, I'm sorry to say. And even if you're just coming in from .NET, let's say, you have a lot more experience available to you, you have a lot more knowledge when it comes to using C#, when it comes to using the .NET framework, hopefully. And it'll be easier for you, but it's still a bit of a pain to learn, and there's a reason why I understand this, because I've done polls on it, and I'm going to show you in a moment. But if you want to make this journey a little bit easier for you, just a smidge, then hold on to your hats, because I got something to show you. Look at this. This is the Microsoft doc for Blazor. God, I have to go through this every single time I have to run a program or build a project or whatever, because I want to look up how to do my inputs. How do I do my inputs? Where's my input stuff? Who knows? It's somewhere buried deep within the arcane structure of the Microsoft documents that I hate so much, and I'm sure a lot of you have loved to go into. But I have a solution for all of you. What's this? It's a Blazor cheat sheet. Get your Blazor cheat sheet at justblazor.com. I made it. It has 19 pages of knowledge right there, ready to go. You just go in here, and if every time you have the question of whether or not you are missing some data binding syntax, maybe you want to know what's in the forms real quick, you don't have to go through the Microsoft Docs to look for it there. It's going to be right here in easy examples, just like I always do on my thing. Go check it out. Go to justblazor.com. Get your free cheat sheet today. Give me your real name, please. I'm just playing. You put whatever you want. My friend doesn't put his real name in here, but I need your real email, though. If not, you're not going to get it. So, yeah. All right. I hope you enjoyed that, whatever that was. It was either my ad or an ad from YouTube. Anyways, what I have here is actually two polls that I found to be very interesting and are actually guiding me when I make my videos. So if you see me do a poll, please participate, because I actually do look at these when I decide to do my next piece of content. So in this case, I have two polls here. One that basically asks, what is your experience? And one that asks, what is it you're having trouble with when it comes to coming to this channel, learning Blazor. So apparently, there is a large chunk of you out there, about a quarter of you more or less, that do not have either .NET or JS experience. About half of you out here just don't understand the Blazor conventions. And then about a quarter of you do not know enough to decide, which tells me that you're probably in around the same category as this. So I could say, safely that a quarter of my audience do not have very much experience in programming, or if they do, it's not enough that they're confident in. So what that tells me is that there is a bit of a disconnect between my videos and whatever it is that you're seeing, whatever it is that you're learning. And I want to direct that. I want to also answer the question about programming in general, not just Blazor. I will tell you this. For those of you who are just getting started, for those of you who do not have that much experience, that you will get a lot of headaches learning programming. It doesn't matter if it's Blazor, it doesn't matter if it's React, it doesn't matter if it's Angular. The actual programming skill and the actual whatever it is you want to apply your programming in is going to be the first hurdle, along with whatever experience you don't have, trying to get through the door, and then trying to get actual experience. Then that opens up a world of different difficulties, but by the time you reach that point, you're pretty much good to go, and you will understand whether or not you're going to like programming or not. So the first one is figuring out whether you like it. If you don't like it, or if you don't find any joy in actually doing programming, then you might want to reconsider whatever your job prospects are. If you do enjoy it and you just find it to be difficult, that's a different thing entirely, and that can be addressed through learning through like my videos such as mine or other videos out there. If you want to go into something like React or Angular, there are other channels that can do that for you. You want to learn Blazor, then sure, stay here and consume the content. But there's also other places that you can learn as well. And even though I rib on Microsoft Docs for for being obtuse and very technical with what it's saying, it does have a value as a repository of information. So, but not really for people like, not for these people here, not for these people who don't have the experience. And I understand that. So what does that mean in terms of Blazor? What are you in for, basically? With Blazor, if I were to open up, I'm just going to go into it real briefly. I might make a video. If there's enough traction on this video, I'll make another video doing a more deep dive into the actual structure of Blazor, because it has been pointed out to me through comments that are left on these polls, or just comments in general, that people don't understand what's actually happening here when these structures are being used. So in this case, which one is this? Down here. Make sure I'm blocking a little bit. Right there. So in this case, I believe this is just a Blazor server project, so nothing fancy is happening. But if you compare this to, let's say, a Blazor WebAssembly, the structure is going to be different, and you might not know why it's different, or you might not even know what's happening here. You don't know why there's different folders doing different things, and you're going to encounter the same problem if you go into, let's say, so this is an Angular project. This is one of the more egregious ones in my opinion, but you probably don't know everything that's happening here either if you were to look at this without any knowledge or without any like guidance whatsoever. You'll probably feel the exact same overwhelming feeling of trying to understand something you just have no knowledge of. And I get that feeling. And you'll get it more from Angular because you'll be staring at this. Where in Blazor, it actually hides some of the more obtuseness to it, like the libraries and stuff that you're using in the background that you don't know is there, but it's there. There's some obtuseness in that, but also just staring at like the conventions being used here. Like, what is this? How does this work, or why does this work? If I know a little bit of programming, then I know that there might be some conventions being used here that don't make sense from whatever basic foundational knowledge you have. And I get that. And there's quite a bit of that. In fact, when I make these videos, I always make it, I try to make it with that in mind, saying that, hey, maybe someone doesn't understand why this works. Is this a Blazor convention, like a Blazor exception to a rule that you probably understand or know? And I do have some, and when I do make my videos, I have a bit of an expectation that you know some C# or something, but I try not to do that too much. However, I think that if you want to learn programming, at least from this channel, there is some things you have to do on your own. I could teach you a lot of what syntax is, what it does, why it's doing it, but a lot of it will come from your own knowledge, and that is part of the growing process of being a programmer in general, especially if you're in this 25% category here. I can get into these other categories a little bit later, but this video is really just for the people who don't have that much experience in. So I think that's why a lot of you are gravitated to my videos, because I get into very specific things in Blazor and just try to extrapolate on them as best as possible in a more layman's term way. Because if you go into the Microsoft Docs, they are not going to explain it very well, even though all the information is technically there, if you think about it. So it's just a Blazor project that I have up here just to show you. And when it comes to the Blazor framework, go to some of these questions here. Sorry if I'm doxing you. This is basically the person who wrote to me. This is more or less why this video was created. It's because I wanted to understand the confusion coming from someone who's just getting into Blazor. Maybe they are coming from a different stack entirely. They don't understand the actual web application process and what a web application structure looks like. What is it that you're looking for? Basically, how to architect things, or at least know a semblance of what the architecture should look like. What am I trying to do? What does a web application look like when it's successful? So I believe some of you do fall into this, and you don't have the experience needed or don't have the knowledge in order to really give context to what I'm writing when I write Blazor. I think that is a confusion that exists. You correct me if I'm wrong out there, if I'm rambling too much or if I'm making any sense. So I think that it might be good to actually do a deep dive into this and explain some of the conventions that go into Blazor server. Let's say we have Blazor WebAssembly. Just a quick recap. Blazor WebAssembly works a little bit differently than most other web application frameworks because it has a technology in it, SignalR, that allows it to do calls from the back end to the front end without having a true dedicated front end in a weird way. Like it's hard to describe, but it's all back end, but you're seeing a front end process happening because of the connection between it and its SignalR. However, that has limitations, and there's a reason why people want Blazor WebAssembly more than they want Blazor Server because of those limitations. And Blazor WebAssembly is closer to what you expect to other frameworks having. Angular and Angular and React work like Blazor Blazor WebAssembly in the sense that they have the traditional. There's a front end piece, then there's a back end piece, and then whatever else is there, and it's more demarcated. So I could get into that if you want. I think that might be helpful for at least a quarter of you out there, and maybe it might be helpful for some of you who are just coming in from a different piece entirely. I didn't know I had a quarter of people from web forms. That's incredible to me. It's crazy for me to know that there's so many people from web forms on this channel specifically. And Razor is more understandable. Razor is the predecessor of Blazor. Blazor has Razor components, as you can tell here. And that is not an accident because Blazor is coming from a Razor background. The Blazor server uses SignalR, which is, I think, similar to Razor's WebSockets, that they have a similar connection between its front end and the back end. So the technology is more understandable to me where if you're coming from Razor to go into this than it is from web forms to come into this. I'm actually very surprised by how many people there are. And I'm not very surprised with this. Actually, the whole channel is dedicated to trying to demystify Blazor conventions. And yeah, the work is apparently I need to do a better job doing that. But that's fine. We'll cover it in time. As far as the actual difficulty of it, the biggest difficulty, in my opinion, are not just the conventions themselves. It's the fact that you have to learn two things at once. You are both learning the Blazor conventions, but also learning C#. C# has its own rules. C# is a language that has its own rules. But it's very similar to, not very similar, that's a lie. The experience will be similar to learning React from scratch or learning Angular from scratch because you're learning a TypeScript language and its conventions as well. But when it comes to C#, there's even more so because C# is an object-oriented programming language. It is far more robust. It has a lot more things you have to keep in mind, a lot more rules to follow, essentially, in order to write good code. There's best practices. There's deeper understandings of how to write your code, where to write it, all that stuff. And that is part of the process of learning Blazor if you don't have the C# knowledge. If you do have C# knowledge and you're pretty much halfway there and all you really care about is the Blazor conventions, especially if you come from somewhere that does not use the modern framework. Like if you're coming from, like this guy did down here, who came from a Unity background. And fun fact, I used to be a Unity developer myself before I went to web application development, so I understand your pain here when you try to move over. But knowing C# does help a lot. And it's just a matter of understanding what a web application structure looks like, or what a good one looks like, at least. And for those of you coming from web forms, you're much further away than Razor when it comes to how similar things are, but you still have the C# experience. You still understand that in the background, things are happening known as pages, and that's where a lot of the code's going to be for each page. So Blazor works in the same way. It's based on a component, but it's different when it comes to web form structure. So for all of you, however, I don't know the amount of experience you actually do have, but it looks like you don't have any, according to this, and not enough to know, so I assume they're about the same. So what you're about to go into is trying to understand how something on the browser communicates with something in a server. Browser can communicate with the server can communicate with the database and bring data from that. So basically, I'm talking about a traditional 3-tier architecture. If you know nothing else, at the very minimum, understand what a 3-tier architecture is, and you will have a better time contextualizing things when it comes to working with web applications, not just in Blazor, but overall in your web app development journey, because that's how things are basically separated. When you go into a Blazor WebAssembly, you have a front end, a back end, and then a database component that are components that communicate with the database somewhere. But that's the traditional way of doing a 3-tier architecture. And even if you go into the cloud, you're probably going to still maintain such a thing. And there are differences in minutia and all that stuff. But if you're just brand new, I would urge you to understand that overall structure before you get into web application development. And then once you understand that there is, my front end is different from my back end, which is different from my database, and that these three have to communicate with each other, then I could go into any web application language I want to, like Blazor, and understand what it's trying to do. It is trying to show things on the browser that comes from a server. The server is trying to do the communication between the browser and the database by both getting data to the browser, making the browser do the showing of the data for the user. The browser will have a way of the user contextualizing inputs. Those inputs get, and whatever they write will be sent back to the server, or part of it will be handled in the browser, depending, and whatever data needs to be sent back will go to the server and ultimately into the database. There are a lot of things that go into it, but this is the most high-level overview. So this is what this video is really for. The video is to help you try to get to a point where things make more sense. And I feel that a lot of that high-level contextualization is lost when I make, let's say, a video very specific on something. I know it's helpful because if you're there just for the information, it does help you. But if you have absolutely no knowledge and it makes no sense to you, that much, and eventually you'll start asking the right questions. I think that is one of the things that you should understand when it comes to programming, is that you want to ask a lot of questions and you shouldn't be afraid to break things on the on your program. I know some of you out here are a bit hesitant to try, but you have to experiment. Like, how many times every video I make, how many mistakes I make before I actually put out a video? A lot, including when it comes to making my projects. I make a lot of mistakes all the time. But you only see the end result. I always make my projects out, and then once I feel that it's ready, then I start, recording and editing it or whatever. But before I get to that stage, I have to build out the project, and then I make a lot of mistakes, and then I learn a lot from that, which is it's part of the reason why I made this video. Not only because I thought that this was a good topic, considering that it does come from these polls that I make, and I feel that there's a lot to be learned from the fact my audience is composed of a lot of people who don't have that experience behind them. I feel that I could do a lot better to you. And also, this buys me some time for my next video, because I am doing a pre-rendering video. I have built out the project. I just have to actually edit it, and it's going to take a little bit of time for that to happen. So it all works out. Thank you very much. But overall, when it comes to the difficulty of learning Blazor, I believe it's more or less the difficulty of learning any language overall. If you already have .NET experience, then learning Blazor is relatively simple. It is just learning the Blazor conventions, because you already know C# stuff. And you can have your C# knowledge carry you more or less into the Blazor stuff. If you have web application experience coming from JavaScript, from a JavaScript framework like React or Angular, you are also pretty decent when it comes to Blazor, because you understand how components work. You understand there has to be something that handles routing. You understand that there needs to be how do you handle those components, how those components will communicate with each other. You already know the right questions to ask when it comes to this. You want to understand how the 3-tier architecture, or how this communication between the front end and the back end are going to work out, and you already can pinpoint exactly what you want to do. Yes, there's some conventions that are lost, like how the page handles its life cycle, which is a video that I want to get into again. I made life cycle videos in the past if you want to check them out, but I might get into something a little more specific to that in how Blazor pages work. But for those of you without any context, it's it's crazy. It doesn't make any sense. It's super duper complex, and there's nothing that helps you anchor you to understanding what you want to learn. So the first thing, if I were you in your position, it doesn't matter if it's Blazor, React, or Angular. The first thing I want you to do is understand that you're trying to build a web application. This is a little bit different than website, even though it looks the same. What you want to do is understand that there is a front end to it, the browser that you see. A server is where all the logic, all the business logic, all that stuff goes into. And then finally, a database where you will house any data that you want to have in there and show to the user at some point, or have it in there for other calculations and whatnot. That is essentially what you're trying to build, this system. And Blazor is just a facilitator of that. And any one of these web frameworks is just that. That is what it means to build a web app. It is more full stack kind of thing, but that's what I am. I'm a full stack developer, but I feel that if you can understand at least the overall high level thing, it makes asking the right questions easier, and it makes learning the process a lot easier. I hope this makes sense to you, and I'm gonna end it here. I think I'm rambling a little too much now, but if you found anything good here, and if you feel like the content should be should have a little bit more towards trying to get you understanding how to actually build a web application from a high level point of view, from point of view of someone who does not understand or has no real experience in doing so, let me know in the comments. If these videos do get popular, I'll make more of them. I always follow whatever the poll is. I always follow whatever the comments are, and I made a video basically based on a comment that was there in a poll. So please participate and help the channel out. And also, if you really want to get that cheat sheet, it will help you by, making the time for you to learning how to do a syntax, or whenever you have a syntax question or just a general question that you don't have to go into the Microsoft Docs to try to decipher what they're saying. So please help me out there. Go to justblazor.com. Anyways, stay tuned to the next video. Thank you very much. Have a good night.